Be live this morning from Fun Recovery's 4th annual charity golf tournament at the Governor's Club in Brentwood. Special thanks to our friends at Pella Windows and Doors for bringing us down here with the full crew present and accounted for. Ramon Foster, Kayla Anderson, and Will Bowling. Pleased to be joined by VolQuest's Austin Price, breaking down a chaotic weekend in Knoxville, Tennessee at the quarterback position as Nico Iamaleava enters the transfer portal. Austin, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you? Is Ramon out there putting right now on the putting green?
No.
He's not, but I am going to leave maybe a segment early today to lose some golf balls here at Governor's Club, Austin. So I'm going to try to imitate what I saw Rory do yesterday.
What are your thoughts? Ramon comes to town and doesn't even come see me, and yet here I agree to come up a day early on the show. I'm put it forward. I should say no.
You didn't see him, Austin?
I mean,
I did not.
He comes to town, doesn't even come speak to me. He's got his belly full of a porterhouse from the old
The old steakhouse was fine.
Yeah. That place is good.
Austin, I owe you, man. I'll be back, I guess, again this fall. So you and I will have to have a dinner if that's okay with you. And on me, too, because, again, I didn't check in. That's on me.
Well, I mean, on you because one of us played a decade in the NFL and has lots of money, and the other doesn't.
Well, there's also that part, too.
Well, you guys were both a little busy over the weekend with everything that transpired. Austin, as we kind of set the table for what is next for Tennessee, how did we get to this point from where we were on Friday when it's, hey, Nico is going to renegotiate a deal, to him skipping practice and getting to a point where Tennessee's moving on 24 hours later? Just how, simply put, did we get here in your mind?
Well, I think at some point late Thursday night, because everything was out there in the public sphere, somebody on his end made the decision to have him not attend practice on Friday morning, because you went from a quarterback dinner Thursday night, and, you know, from all accounts, from everybody I've talked to, everything was normal, everything was business as usual, playing with the kids at Coach Halsey's house and so on and so forth, to all of a sudden, 10 hours later, he wasn't there in the facility for practice. And when that happened, really the hands were tied of Josh Heupel. You had to do what Coach Heupel did. And, I mean, you could say Nico and his camp made the decision by not showing up for practice. Either way, the split was inevitable at that point, and Tennessee had to do what they did, and it's on to the next.
So, Austin, with that situation then, and looking ahead, where does Tennessee evaluate Jake Merklinger and George McIntyre, and how much confidence do you think they have in those two guys, and maybe Merklinger primarily being the incumbent and having more experience stepping into a larger role this season?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where Jake Merklinger has the inside track because he's a year further along in the system. But, I mean, I think Coach Heupel would tell you this is an open competition. And, Jake's got to go out there and earn it. He's got to go out there and win it. He had a really strong spring, impressed a lot of people, not just the coaching staff, but, I mean, people that were coming to practice. I mean, I had, high school coaches and other people that were at practice over the course of spring that were like, I tell you who's just as good as Nico, maybe even threw a little better, was Jake Merklinger. Those people said those things 2 or 3 weeks before any of this happened. It was very interesting. But, again, that's practice. He's got to translate it to the field. And, Jake's had a strong spring. And I think the biggest thing for Tennessee is they've got to add somebody else to the room. And, they can't go into the season with just two. They've got to add somebody. The question is who's available, who reaches out to Tennessee, because that job's now a pretty attractive job open, right? I mean, how many agents that, have quarterbacks are going, Tennessee's open, and I mean, look what Nico's getting paid. It'd be a nice payday, go over there. I mean, all of a sudden they start, trying to back channel to Tennessee about interest in players. Again, I'm fascinated to see what happens over the next couple of, weeks with the portal open for 9 or so days. Like, what happens? There's going to be lots of rumors. I've said for the last couple of days, it won't be as bad as the groomers, but the search for another quarterback is going to have a lot of chatter out there, and you're going to have to filter through what's real and what's not.
Austin Price of VolQuest's and On 3 joined us this morning discussing Nico Iamaleava. Austin, from what I've heard, and I'm not sure what your reporting has been from guys inside the locker room, but that missed practice did a lot of damage, I feel like, to Nico's reputation. Is that some of the conversation that you had around guys is, hey, show up at least for us, and that didn't happen on Friday?
Yeah, I think there was a right way and a wrong way to handle this. I think, the right way obviously would have been to show up Friday, go through the motions, show up Saturday, go through the motions, and then just tell the coaching staff on Tuesday or Wednesday, hey, guys, I'm just going to go in a different direction. I'm going to go enter the portal. I think Nico saves a lot of face by doing that. I think it was a bad decision to not go to practice. This isn't the NFL. There is no holdout, but there's no winner out of any of this. Tennessee's not a winner. I don't think Nico is certainly a winner. It's really unfortunate, but I mean that's a tough pill for everybody involved. And so, for Nico and his camp, now they have to turn the page and see, who's willing to kind of go down that road with them. Because, I mean, the national sentiment out there is it's not been real good for that group the last couple of days. And for Tennessee, they've got to figure out, who has interest, who do you bring in? How do they mesh in the room? How do they fit into the system? How quickly can they learn the system? Over a 3-month span. It will be fascinating to kind of watch both sides kind of figure out their future steps.
Also, when you also look at this situation as if it is about money, right, more than anything, if there was rumors that something happened in December as far as the threat to hop in the portal then, and of course with the idea of Nico leaving in the spring too, was this a situation where Tennessee just sat put and said you're not going to use us for another payday just to leave again in December of 2025? Was that a little bit of why Tennessee was a little reluctant to kind of bend the knee a little bit for your starting quarterback? Because I mean, there's no real security in saying, yes, we're going to pay you $4 million, and then, oh, wow, you left us in December again, because you can't really hold them to contracts and say you're committed to us for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nico was going to be 1 year anyway. Like whether one way or the other, I think this was going to be his last football season here, because you can't have Nico in the room, Faison in the room, George in the room, Merklinger in the room financially. Like, I mean, that's, in the old days you could, not anymore. So, I just think it's unfortunate, the whole thing, just kind of how it transpired. Whether it's money or not. I mean, it kind of broke down. I know what was being reported out there about the whatever before the Ohio State game. I have never heard that. I talked to multiple people last night that told me that was not true. I have no reason to believe that is true based off the people I talked to. But again, everybody's got to stand on kind of what they're hearing and what they're reporting, and either way, it's an unfortunate deal for both sides, because I do think Nico was poised to have a really good year this year. I thought he was, he obviously got a ton of upside and really has a lot of talent.
Austin Price, our good friend of VolQuest's, joining us this morning on RK Dub. So when it comes to adding someone from the transfer portal, and again, there are quarterbacks who can now enter that, maybe seeing some intrigue with Nico Iamaleava leaving. Austin, I know this is a quarterback-friendly system with Josh Heupel, but realistically, how tough is it to come in at this time of the year and maybe have that guy be ready, or do you go with one of the younger guys and, roll the dice on them?
I was just doing Birmingham radio with Cole Kublik and Greg McElroy before I came on with you guys, and I asked Greg, I said, you played the position. How hard is it to arrive in May and crash course a new system, maybe a system you're not familiar with, and have success? And he goes, well, I'll look back at, Joe Burrow. He goes, look at Joe Burrow in year one, having arrived in May, and look at Joe Burrow in year two. And he goes, it was two different quarterbacks. And so I do think you're asking a lot of someone. Again, who is available, and how do they mesh, and what do they want NIL wise, all that stuff. Because I think, the agents that are going to look and say, oh, Tennessee's available, they're going to say, "Oh, we'll go and get Nico's blank millions of dollars," right? But Tennessee may go, we're not willing to go there, or Tennessee may go, hey, we're willing to go up. You just don't know how all that's going to transpire on that side of things. And again, I think it boils down to who is willing to come in. If it's an established starter at a winning school, I just don't see that being an option, because you're giving up a place at your current school for, a crash course at Tennessee. Now, if you're at a mid-level Power 4 that had a lot of success last year and it's a chance to jump up, maybe that makes a lot more sense. And obviously there are some players out there that are really good quarterbacks, and we've seen guys like that move around the last few years and have success at different venues, but that's always been in January, not May. And I think that's where this thing gets tricky. So there's a lot of intrigue, a lot of unknown. There's a lot of unknown about this football team, Kayla. And some of it you're just not going to know until they line up and play Syracuse and get into that September swing.
Well, much of the Nico Iamaleava news kind of took away from the scrimmage, or the game that happened on Saturday. Austin, what was maybe the biggest headline on the field from that game?
That youth was served. I mean, every time you looked around, it was freshman making a play, freshman making a play, redshirt freshman making a play, true sophomore making a play that didn't play a ton last year. So, I think there's a lot of quality players on this roster. Obviously everybody is going to talk about the quarterback because it's a quarterback-driven game, but Tennessee's got some nice young pieces across the board, Kayla, at a lot of different positions.
How much does that, though, put the pressure on Josh Heupel now as a head coach, with this move being made, moving on from Nico, and having younger players that, no matter if it's quarterback or other spots, have got to step up now in a bigger way?
Yeah, I think it might take pressure off. I mean,
Okay.
Go into the season, Tennessee's going to be picked, I think they'll be picked middle of the road of the SEC. I had multiple national people say, 7-5, 8-4. And I'm like, well, they still got really good talent. I think it boils down to who's playing quarterback and how do they play quarterback. And the schedule's not overly difficult. Your big three are all separated. You play one in September, one in October, one in November. Other than that, you go to Lexington. That roster's not very good. You go to Starkville. They were a train wreck a year ago. Oklahoma comes to Neyland. That's the first part of November. So the schedule's not overly difficult. Again, how quickly can you adjust and settle into the season, I think will determine the success of this football team.
Austin Price of VolQuest, our guest. Austin, last December when it was originally rumored that Nico may enter the portal, Mike Matthews was that name that was potentially going to enter because he thought Nico was going to enter at first. For him and other guys who maybe came to Tennessee in part to play with Nico Iamaleava, how much concern is there on that roster, Austin, of an exodus following Nico of other guys who could enter the portal when it opens on Wednesday?
Yeah, a lot of times you hear there's a lot of chatter about guys that could potentially enter. There's a little chatter about a few guys. None of them are your superstar players, though. So, unless something comes out of left field, it certainly feels like Tennessee's going to be able to keep most of this intact. But again, I think, that's where, your veterans really have to stand tall, and they have to really work things behind the scenes and make sure, players like Mike and Lance Hurd and Wendell Moy and people like that are solid. And, again, you've built depth on this roster where, if you lose the right player or two, it won't just totally, weaken you a ton. And I think receiver would be the one spot that it would be a big blow just because you're not overly deep there. In fact, I would call you, just, adequate as far as depth. I mean, 7's just not a lot, and that 7 is really inexperienced.
Also, we talked about Merklinger. We've gone with the portal part of this as well. With George McIntyre specifically, how surprised would you be to see him start a game this season now, considering the other options Tennessee has at quarterback?
You broke up. What did you say, Will?
With George McIntyre, how surprised would you be to see him start a game at some point this year, considering the lack of other options that Tennessee has now?
I think it just depends, again, who Tennessee brings in. Georgia's got to put weight on. I saw him Saturday. And I
For
said,
sure.
Man, you should have a peanut butter milkshake in your hand at all
Yeah.
times. Like, I mean, he has put weight on. He's like 197 or whatever. I mean, like, he's put weight on. But at 6'6", 197 still looks really, really thin. I mean, like, look at Nico. I mean, again, Nico's super tall. And even when he put on weight that first year, like, it was hard to tell, you know. And so, like, Georgia's got to continue to throw on the weight. And I think the next 2 or 3 months is paramount for him. And he's got to prepare like he's going to have a shot, right? I mean, like, I think that's very, very important. The people that just assume Merklinger, and I think you're okay to do that because, again, he's been in the program longer, but I don't think it's just some cut and dry thing to where it's Jake's job and it's, you know, Jake's the locked-in guy. And I think, you know, they're going to go to the portal. They're going to let that ball play out. They're all going to compete in August. And then it maybe Jake Merklinger. It may be a transfer. I would be surprised if George started the opener. But at some point this year, I think a lot of it depends on how they play in front of him.
I guess, Austin, also, too, I'd like to ask, like, what is Tennessee losing in Nico? Like, was he your frontline recruiter? You know, the way you see quarterbacks on campuses be? Like, is that a portion of it as it pertains to recruiting classes and, like, moving forward? Is that something you're losing also?
No, I don't really think so, Ramon. I mean, Nico never had that big of an impact in recruiting. I mean, his class, he was on the other side of the United States, and, you know, even though he was in here for visits, it wasn't the same as, like, George last year, who was, you know, over here so much all through the recruiting window. You know, and in this era, like your era, you know, all that stuff mattered. And in this era, a lot of it still comes back down to the NIL. So, like, yeah, I like this player, and I'd love to play with him, but I really need this kind of NIL deal. So, like, it still boils down to that, and it just plays a small, small part.
He is VolQuest's Austin Price at Austin Priceless, where you follow him on Twitter for the latest Tennessee football news as the transfer portal heats up this week. Austin, we appreciate you making it work a day early this week. Appreciate it.
You guys, anytime. Caleb's got black, you've got white, and Ramon's got orange. If the producer has gray, we've got the full color wheel.
We do.
I know, right?
Uniforms.
Didn't even know
Hopefully Ramon can visit with you next time,
Yeah. I love
AP.
Probably not. He's too big time, you know. He starts hanging around Hubs. And it all goes down.
Hubs, by the way, how about Hubs getting a shout out from Heupel saying Hubs has already petitioned
Right?
and say, I can show you my arm. Maybe Brett Hubs is an option for quarterback.
Listen, unless I've seen him swing a golf club and he can't hit it over 110 yards. So I have a tough time feeling like he can throw I feel like I don't think he can throw the sideline out passes that required in Heupel.
See, gotta have value. Hubs
I love it.
He's better with his wrists than
High
he is
football
with his
IQ
legs.
kind of guy. Thank you, Austin. Appreciate
Thanks,
you, sir.
Austin.
Appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate it,
Thanks.
All right, there's Austin Price. More coming up next year from Governor's Club. We're going to be joined by a Pro Football Hall of Famer. Coming up next, a man who started 140 straight games in the National Football League. Hall of Famer John Randall sits down with us next.